Welcome to Professionalism and Customer Service in the Health Environment. Key Elements of Effective Communication. This unit introduces the transactional nature of communication and identifies the verbal and nonverbal elements that provide for effective communication. This is Lecture A, Verbal Communication. The objectives of this lecture, Verbal Communication, are to define communication, identify assumptions used in communication, identify communication models from general to health-specific, and identify variables used in communication. Starting from the late 1940s, there have been many definitions of communication. Common to most of these definitions are four components. The first component is the sender. The second component is the receiver of the information. The third component is the transfer of information itself. In addition, in order for the transfer of information to occur, there must be a set of common rules to enable understanding. Thus, a common set of rules is the fourth component. A simple example of common rules is a common language. Try to think of the difficulty in sharing information verbally with a person who does not speak the same language you do. When we combine the four components, a simple definition for communication follows. Communication is the process of sharing information between a sender and a receiver of the information using a set of common rules. For some, the word communication reflects a linear, one-way transfer of information. The sender delivers a message to a receiver. However, communication is not that simple. Instead, we have found communication to be ongoing, changing, and dynamic. Indeed, it is a process, and physical and emotional states may change in both the sender and the receiver during the process of communicating. For example, imagine that your 5-year-old son has not cleaned his room, even though you have told him to do so 3 times. You might be frustrated and ready to read him the riot act. When you talk to him, though, and he looks exhausted and has a high-grade fever, the entire conversation changes into something different, and you are likely to shift to concern over the well-being of your loved one. The transactional nature of communication suggests a reciprocal relationship where there is a continual feedback loop. In this way, the sender influences the receiver. In turn, the sender is influenced by the receiver. Stated more simply, communication can be thought of as a two-way street. The information communicated may adapt to the conversation. For example, an HIT professional may go to administration to seek funding for a new initiative, only to be blindsided by request for information on a completely unrelated project. So, to adapt, the HIT professional covers those questions first, then redirects back to the original purpose of the meeting. The transactional nature of communication is considered by some people to be an extension of the process itself. The last basic assumption of human communication is that communication is multidimensional. Some suggest there are 2 dimensions or levels. The first one surrounds the content of the message, and the second one is the relationship or context dimension. During a conversation, these 2 dimensions are active and can influence one another. For example, take your supervisor asking you, "Why did you not finish the coding this week?" Under one scenario, it could be a playful jest when he knows that you have spent the week supporting users during an intense implementation. Under another, it could be that you are at a meeting where all the other programmers completed their projects on time, and the delay in yours is going to hinder the project. Or it may be a combination of both meanings. Concern that there will be a delay, but said in a joking way to convey that the supervisor understands the reason for the delay. Nordhaus and Nordhaus discuss a variety of communication models. one of the oldest communication models, is known as the Shannon and Weaver model. Developed in 1949, the model contains 5 components which are focused around the message itself. They are 1. Information source, 2. Transmitter, 3. Sources of noise, 4. Receiver, and 5. Destination. The information source is the actual message content of the conversation. The transmitter refers to the person who will be sending the message. Sources of noise refer to anything that creates difficulty in receiving the message. An example would be if there is a psychiatric patient in the emergency room who is yelling at everyone who passes, asking for tobacco products. If someone were trying to talk to you while this is going on, the actual noise might make it difficult for you to get the message. On the other hand, if the patient is the sender trying to communicate, the inappropriateness of the behavior might create a different kind of noise that would make his own message difficult to receive. The receiver is the person intended to get the message. Finally, the destination refers to the message having been received. That is, it reached its destination and was understood. The second model is the Berlo communication model, which is also known as the SMCR model, where S refers to source, M refers to message, C refers to channel, and R refers to receiver. The first component, the source, refers to the sender of the information. Attributes of the source include the communication skills of the sender and his or her attitudes, knowledge, social system, and culture. In short, the message is affected by the attributes or characteristics of the source. For example, if many technically proficient IT personnel speak in technical jargon to clinical personnel, who often have no idea what they're talking about. The next component for this model, the message, has its own unique characteristics, such as structure and content code. The structure of a message refers to how a message is arranged. The code is the form in which the message is sent, such as using language or gestures. The third component, channel, deals with how, or by what avenue, the message is sent or received, such as seeing, touching, smelling, and/or tasting. For example, you may find that some people respond differently to emails versus face-to-face meetings. Clinicians will often complain quite bitterly in emails about a system, only to transform into almost reasonable actors when they meet you face-to-face. In these cases, it's important to determine which channels work best with your constituency, and do your best to encourage use of those channels. Finally, the last component is the receiver. The message that will be received is dependent on the receiver's communication skills, attitudes, knowledge, social system, and culture. It is important to understand that both the source of the information and the receiver of the information are affected by their own skills, attitudes, knowledge, and social system or culture. The Berlo or SMCR model is a very popular model. The models displayed on this slide all serve to emphasize the specific clinician-client communications in the healthcare environment. The therapeutic model addresses the important role of relationships in assisting clients and patients with an overall goal of moving away from illness and towards health. This communication often occurs between clinician and patient. It serves to increase the clinician's understanding of the patient's perspective of the illness and helps the patient cope. Finally, the King interaction model is related to the communication process between nurses and patients. This model incorporates dimensions of relationship, process, and transaction identified as crucial elements in the successful communication process. On the previous slide, we saw 2 different health-related communication models. In each of the models, the communication was between clinician and client. Does this mean that communication within a healthcare setting needs to follow one of these 2 models? The answer is no. In carrying out duties associated with being an HIT professional, your communication will likely take place in all different areas and levels in the organization. Depending on the group you are to be working with, you will need to adapt your style to suit the situation. Expect people to express frustration in the projects you will be working on, for as an HIT professional, your projects represent change. Change is more often as not met with resistance. Your ability to communicate with and adapt to people with different attitudes and skill levels will be critical to successful implementation of change. Oftentimes, you will be communicating that the information system does not yet possess, or the budget cannot fund, certain functions or features. For example, biometric security devices or voice recognition. It will be important that while you tell clinicians about limitations, that you can explain why the features cannot be included and what plans, if any, there may be for adding them in the future. As we have seen, communication in the healthcare setting includes 4 different types of interactions. These are professional with professional, professional with client, professional with the family or significant other, and client with family or significant other. For example, a physician may discuss treatment options with a patient's spouse if the patient has Alzheimer's disease. Considered in the context of the healthcare IT professional, there will be communication between other professionals, clients, including patients, and the public. While there is no one specific HIT communication model, the Berlo SMCR model is appropriate in this context because it addresses all of the elements involved in the transactional and complex process of communication. We will now move on to discuss some of the communication variables that Nordhaus and Nordhaus identify. We have previously presented communication models and action variables that play a part in the communication models. Our focus now shifts to additional variables that are often a part of health communication and support the transactional nature and, at times, the emotional nature of communication. We will discuss each one of these variables in detail in the following slides. Empathy is one of the more complex variables in communication. The term empathy is thought to have its origins in the early 1900s as feeling into by German psychologist Theodor Lipps. There are many different definitions, such as relating to others' feelings, acknowledging the state of another person, and sharing one's feelings. A common single-word definition for empathy is understand. The slang phrase, "I see where you're coming from," reflects the understanding perspective. When HIT professionals empathize with others in the healthcare setting, they improve the accuracy of their communication. For example, if someone was supporting implementation of a new tracking system for an emergency department, and there were nurses who were having difficulty understanding what the different icons mean, an empathetic technique might be to tell them in a non-patronizing tone that you can see that their job is complex and ask which actions they do most often. Redirect the discussion to focus on those aspects first, and after their mastery, move on to the others. In addition, the use of empathy helps HIT professionals develop effective, strong interpersonal relationships, which are essential to establishing productive rapport with clinicians. Building trust and good rapport will help soothe the multitude of stressful situations that could otherwise result in antagonistic relationships. It is important to note that empathy is not sympathy or pity for an individual or coworker. Again, think of the word understand. In communication, control is also an important factor. There are 2 components of control. The first one, personal control, refers to the perception that a person can influence the way he or she responds internally to external events. Thus, personal control reflects how strongly one feels about one's own actions and minimizes the thought of powerlessness. For example, enabling a physician to choose between several options to address a workflow issue will give that physician ownership and a sense of control of the solution and greatly increase the probability of successful implementation. The second component of control is relational control. Relational control focuses on relationships or interpersonal characteristics. Stated more simply, in the communication process, relational control addresses interactions that occur between individuals during communication. It is always important to share control in conversations as much as possible. For example, conversations that are heavily dominated by one party can serve to devalue the other party who may think, my input or ideas are not needed or valued. Sharing control allows both parties to feel that they are being heard and respected. In healthcare IT, it is important to know that you will be working among a myriad of highly intelligent professionals, and that they will not react as well to mandates as they will to collaboration. Even if the implementation is a corporate mandate, there will be aspects where collaboration will be possible, and you should seize on those and show the users you are trying to incorporate their desires into the solution. Always strive to give the users some ownership in the solution being implemented. The third variable, trust, is a central variable in human communication. Trust refers to having confidence in others. In the professional setting, having trust creates a supportive climate, thereby reducing defensive or negative communication. From an HIT professional's perspective, developing and/or further improving trust includes projecting to the users competence with the technical components, without getting too technical about it, and collaborating with them on the non-technical process components that are crucial to effective implementation. In short, because clinicians and administrators are quite busy and have plenty on their plates as it is, if you, as the designated IT resource, are untrustworthy, they will seek to avoid you, may sabotage your initiatives, or will demand another resource for assistance. It is also important to remember that for some people, trust must be earned. Your actions over a period of time will allow a trusting relationship to develop. Be prepared to put in the time to earn the user's trust. The fourth variable is self-disclosure. Self-disclosure is defined as a process in which an individual communicates personal information, thoughts, or personal feelings to others. While self-disclosure is frequently seen in a patient-physician relationship so the physician can effectively manage the patient's care, it is not frequently seen in professional-to-professional communication. Of note, in any care delivery setting, one must always safeguard what is said, observed, or heard regarding any patient information. Patient information constitutes protected health information, PHI, and should only be shared with those who have a need to know in accordance with organizational policies and privacy regulations. Inappropriate sharing of a patient's information can lead to being terminated and can also carry heavy fines for the offending party. Our last variable is confirmation. Confirmation is a way of sharing acknowledgement and acceptance to others. While confirmation can include aspects of the four previously defined variables, it is also a variable itself. There are both verbal and nonverbal aspects of confirmation. An example of verbal confirmation is repeating what the other person said, such as, "I heard you say you want to pursue use of templates for procedure documentation," or, "So my understanding is you do not like the user interface in that radiology worklist system?" This can reduce ambiguity and result in a more effective course of action. A nonverbal aspect of confirmation is to physically nod one's head up and down in agreement to what is being said by a client. It is very helpful in the practice of HIT that you document when important decisions are made and who made them. People will forget, and others will ask, "Who thought of that?" And being able to search notes to identify the forum and participants in a decision will be expected. It is helpful to recap the decisions and tasks to be done at the end of any meeting or conversation. This concludes Lecture A of Key Elements of Effective Communication. In summary, we have reviewed the common elements of communication and presented a definition. We explored the three common assumptions of communication, including the process nature of communication, the transactional nature of communication, and the multidimensional nature of communication. We identified two popular communication models and two health-related communication models. The health-related communication models were presented to share examples of clinician-client communication interactions. Finally, we identified 5 common variables used in communication in the healthcare setting. It is important to note that the assumptions and variables, when used together, enable effective communication.